I'm Duncan MacLeod, editor at TechCentral, and this is Meet the CIO. Meet the CIO is brought to you by NTT Data, where global experience meets local impact. My guest today is Derek Wilcocks, Group CIO at Discovery, one of South Africa's most technology-intensive companies and one of the few exporting homegrown software and data science to the world. Derek and I go back a long way. I knew him when he was a senior executive at NTT Data. We held a number of roles in businesses, including Internet Solutions. He also served as NTT Data's Group CIO and later led the Middle East and Africa business as CEO. He's been with Discovery since 2018. Derek, it's really great to see you. Welcome to the show, and thank you for making the time.
Thanks for having me, Duncan. It's wonderful to see you again.
It has been too many years. Derek, of course, we're going to be talking about a lot about AI today. I think it's the topic everyone's been talking about for the last 3 or 4 years now. But Discovery in particular has been doing some very interesting stuff with artificial intelligence, and I want to dive into that in a bit of detail in today's discussion. But I think, as you know, as we do on the show, we tend to start the discussion with a little bit about the backstory of our guests. So I'm not going to break with convention there, and I'm going to ask you about a little bit about your career history. And you specifically, I think you read economics and computer science at WITS, if I remember correctly, and that was in the late 1980s. Just remind me how you got into computers in the first place. What was your interest in the field?
I had my first Commodore VIC-20 given to me when I was in what was then Standard 4 for slightly younger people, grade 6. And I started to program in BASIC on that computer on my television screen. And then you'd, of course, save that program onto a cassette tape. Itself not something everyone would remember. And I think it had 4 kilobytes of memory. That was the sum total of it. So that was where I started. I wanted to study electrical engineering, but my father made me go and work in an electrical engineering workshop at an AECI factory just outside Rustenburg, which is where I spent my high school years. And I think his point was that I probably didn't want to work in an environment that was dirty, dusty, and largely physically unpleasant. And he succeeded. Of course, I don't know a single electrical engineer who works in such an environment today. But that made me change direction, and I went to study computer science and economics at WITS. I was very fortunate in that choice. I think at the time, and still today, actually, WITS has got an absolutely exceptional group of people in that computer science and applied math space. They were really very, very good to me. I had wonderful lecturers. I think a few of them are still around. I know people like Philip Mechanic and Scott Hazelhurst. I believe he's still at WITS now, just in a slightly different role. They were mentors to me, and they encouraged, I think, a group of us that then went out into industry, and we've done various different things. I was also very lucky that I was at university with Ronnie Aptiaka, who started Internet Solutions. So I'd had a bursary from what was then InfoPlan, which became Denel Informatics, and I was very grateful to them. They paid for my university studies. I started working for them. And then I had this idea that we should start to manage networks over the internet, which then had just been launched. And I went and tried to pitch this idea to David Frankel, whom I'd never met, who was Ronnie's co-founder. And I could see David Frankel was totally disinterested, I went back and, okay, well, they're not interested. And about 2 weeks later, I got a phone call, and they said, we've realized that people connecting to the internet are somewhat worried about information security, and they're starting to ask us all these questions about firewalls and so on. And, wouldn't you like to come and run this firewall company? And oh, by the way, we've been negotiating with someone else for 3 months to do this, and that hasn't worked out. So could you please start in a month's time? And by the way, we need your answer tomorrow. So I made I've only made 3 or 4 good decisions in my career and life, actually, getting married to the right person, and this was one of them. I made a decision overnight, and I said to them, okay, I'll join you. And I suppose the rest was history. I was the 12th person to join Internet Solutions. I started a little subsidiary of theirs called Trusted Network Solutions, which sold all the first firewalls into the banks, etc. Again, I was very lucky. We had some very good technical people who joined me. And although I was quite technical myself, I was never quite in their league. And yeah, we went and installed firewalls at all the major banks, and started the whole security industry around the internet. And the rest is history. I then stayed. Internet Solutions was acquired by Dimension Data, which became NTT Data, your sponsor for today's program. And I spent 23 years there in a variety of roles. And then in 2018, I think my career at NTT Data had kind of run its course. It was increasingly moving to London, which is where the head office now is. And I was looking for something else. And I'd met really a wonderful man through the course of my career at NTT Data, a man named John Robertson. He was one of the founders of Discovery together with Adrian and Barry. And John and I had kept a relationship over the years, and I'd been speaking to them, and John was part of the interview process. He was retiring. And I had a wonderful opportunity then to join Discovery, which I think, as everyone knows, is a company with quite an amazing value system and innovative ethos. And the rest, is just history and where I am today. Mostly good luck, Duncan, is the answer.
I was actually I still chat quite a bit to Ronnie Aptek. As you know, he moved to Ukraine, and just before I think the war started there, and he's been through a bit of a rough time. But do you keep in contact with those guys from the early days? David, of course, went off to a very successful investing career in the United States. Alan Aptek, there were with a number of names, a number of people there who went on to very successful careers. Do you still? Is it still quite a tight-knit group? Do you talk to each other all the time still?
I'm not part of a tight-knit group with them, but I do see them every now and again. I still, I love Ronnie, and every now and again he'll phone me about something new that he wants to do. But when I say every now and again, once every 2 years, and then, we'll get together. Mm-hmm. I haven't seen David for many years. David is an amazing networker, and I think he very kindly, after he became unbelievably successful in Boston, would still try and fit me in, but, he'd come over and he'd say, no, well, you have to, I can meet you at Melrose Arch, but, we're going to meet at this coffee shop, and it's at 10:15, and I have to leave at, 28 minutes past 10. And David is very good like that. I think if I were to call him, I'd still see him. Alana I've seen a few times, actually more for personal reasons. He has a son and a year older than he has a couple of children, but one of his sons is a year older than mine, and they happen to end up playing water polo against each other. So every now and again I would see him next to the water polo pool. And yeah, that was nice to reunite with them on.
Okay, good stuff. So, Derek, you've been a CEO and a CIO. I think you held both of those roles in Dimension Data. In your view, does having sat in both chairs change how you approach your current role?
I think it does. I think it's an unusual background for a CIO, because most CIOs, I think, have come up, more through the more technical ranks. Whereas I had the privilege of, being involved in, acquisitions and, setting overall business strategy and, all of those aspects. So I do think that it's given me a set of capabilities which would proved very useful, I think, at Discovery and hopefully for Discovery, because Discovery, I think, is not in need of a technical leader. It has unbelievably good technical people who've been very loyal to the company over many, many years. And, I would put them up against the best that you'd find on the supply side of the South African industry and some of the best in the world. And it's created an environment where those technical people are highly valued. I suppose it's not the definitive point, but if you look at organizational levels, which unfortunately are there in any big organization, the chief architects in the business are the same level as the CIOs, which is an interesting just observation. And that has been true certainly since long before I joined Discovery. So you've got, excellent technical people, excellent CIOs who understand the business very well. And I think what they wanted was somebody that could balance the need to move very quickly, which tends to result in federating everything and pushing it as close to the edge as possible, with the need to meet increasing governance, risk, compliance, and also to do some things that would add value to the whole and not just be of value to the individual parts. And I think that the skills that I developed as a CEO to work in an environment where you're trying to pull together multiple people that are, largely going in their own directions, and trying to deal, I suppose, with the more human aspects of senior management and leadership, have helped me greatly. I don't think that's true for every CIO, and I don't think it's true for every organization, because I think, a lot of organizations do want somebody who actually can be the technical leader. But that's not, I think, necessary at Discovery. I mean, I tell you in all humility, there are many far better technical people at Discovery than I am.
You, of course, have a tech-savvy CEO in Adrian Gore, who clearly wants to position Discovery at the intersection of tech and financial services. Is that a blessing or a curse for you as CIO?
Well, I think that what is very exciting about Discovery is that Discovery has a strong value and a strong track record of delivering innovation. Every year there, 100 to 200 new product features that are launched across all the different businesses. Sometimes they're completely new businesses, completely new capabilities. And of course, many of them depend on tech. And I think Adrian, whilst he's certainly very aware of technology and interested in what it can do, he actually doesn't get that involved in the technology itself. But what he does get very involved in is to say, we've got to keep innovating. We've got to push the envelope. We've got to launch new products. And what that tends to do is it pulls through a lot of technology innovation as well, because in trying to support those innovative business ideas, you have to innovate to deliver the undergirding technology.
So it sounds more blessing than curse then, that you have a
I think it is more of a
leader
blessing
who
than a
wants to
curse.
innovate. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I think many people are nervous to innovate because they look first and foremost at the returns that they'll get. And I think that what's very interesting about Discovery is it just has this culture of continually innovating. And it has a way of managing it so that it's, obviously good for shareholders. But it doesn't, spend months, bogged down in, can we get a return from this? It launches the innovations and then will scale them up if they're going to be good for shareholders. But it launches the innovation on the back of a value system that values innovation and I think a real desire. It sounds a bit corny, but a real desire to actually do what's good for members, which also is very good about Discovery. And something I really enjoy about Discovery is that it's a company that, in a way that has to be experienced by being there. It really believes in its core purpose and values.
Mm. Derek, of course, a lot of the tech that Discovery is building is consumer facing. I think your latest innovation is personal health pathways, which I think you're now starting to take global. But the story that perhaps isn't as aired as much is how Discovery is using technology behind the scenes. Maybe take us through what the tech stack looks like inside the group and what you do differently to other companies.
Well, I think I already alluded to it when I spoke about the structure. I mean, first of all, there is no single tech stack.
Okay.
I suppose if you look at the history of the South African business, you had a tech stack originally developed for the health business, and of course that's a highly transactional intensive business, which frequently interacts with members, not as frequently as a bank, but people are frequently dealing with their medical aid administrator. And then the next business that was launched was the life insurance business. And of course, a life insurance business traditionally very rarely interacts with members. So those two, I think, necessitated a very different technology approach. The one very much focused on high transaction volumes, high transactional integrity, and a user interface, initially through a call center, but subsequently through web, mobile, and now chat, AI and so on that was frequently used. The other one dealing with very complex and long-lived policy constructs where data integrity over a 30, 40, 50-year period is essential, because somebody may have a certain alteration to a life policy that really only becomes important when they claim 30 years later. So you had these two tech stacks, and a lot of what is in Discovery today was born out of those two tech stacks. But then slightly altered to meet the specific requirements of the 6 or 7 lines of business that we've launched, and each of them now has their own CIO. And then I think they made a very good decision in South Africa, which is that when they launched the bank, they obviously asked Barry Hoare to come and help them do that. And I mean, Barry, I think you know him well, and I mean he's a seasoned banker and a seasoned technologist. I think arguably one of the best in the country. And Barry, brought in a completely different approach again for the bank, which, although Barry left a couple of years ago, I think has now proven to be very successful in the bank. And then that was exported, or the health and life businesses were exported to the UK, and that business is now growing very rapidly for us, but I think we've realized that the market dynamics there are different. And interestingly enough, I think we're now unifying the life and health stacks onto a single technology stack that will allow us to deal with some very specific characteristics of the UK market, which, if you want, we can explore, but they are slightly different. So what we've got is these, multiple tech stacks, but we do have a couple of things that we all share. And those are very important, and they've really proved to be very important as we've moved into the world of AI. One is that we've always seen data as an asset that, with various regulatory constraints, which are very real about sharing data between different licensed businesses and financial services, we've got a single data set. It's not always perfect, and sometimes we do have data cleaning that we need to do. But actually, John, I think back in the 1990s, made an incredibly important decision, which was that anyone who dealt with Discovery would have a unique entity number. And that persists to this day. So we know that a member is unique. So I think where a lot of other financial services companies had to spend several years in the 2010s trying to knit together customers across, card and home loans and, insurance and so on. We've had that in place from the outset. And I think that's helped us to build this, data set, which now is certainly not the biggest, but certainly one of the richest in the world. which particularly in the health and wellness, and then the extension of that into life insurance, mortality and morbidity space, really underpins everything that we do. So what that's then brought with it is the need to have proper governance and security of that data set across all businesses, and a very strong approach to ethics. So we've got a separate ethics team that looks at data ethics. And then we have, very strong privacy and security capabilities with this data set. And that underpins products that you have already mentioned, like personal health pathways. I think the genesis of personal health pathways itself is interesting, which is that it wasn't something that we thought up because of AI. Discovery launched the Vitality program in the late 1990s, 2000s, because Adrian had an epiphany that we could actually provide differential premiums to people in life insurance. In health in South Africa, that's not permitted because we have community-rated schemes, but in life insurance, you can do that. And that we could ask people and encourage them to behave better, and that would actually help them to live longer and to have, less frequent claims. It would therefore lower the premiums on their policies, and we would share in that profit with them. So, the member would have lower premiums, we would have higher profits for our shareholders, and we'd get into this sort of virtuous cycle. And I think that's proved prescient for Discovery. But for most of Vitality's history, Vitality was the same for everyone. So, a lot of South Africans will know that you have to hit 900 points in a week, that, you can typically do that through having 3 runs in a week, as long as you get your heart rate up to a certain level. And that was the same for everyone. And that, I think, was what we've always aspired, but never had the technical capability to change and to personalize. And I think what AI has given us is the ability to now start to personalize that. And that's very important, because I think you get, different types of members. You get members who just naturally buy into the Discovery world, and, often they are people who are already healthy and look after everything that they do financially and in terms of their fitness and their, health checks and tests and so on. But then you get people, I think, just battle a little bit to get into that kind of discipline that's maybe not quite in their personality or nature, and maybe had 1 or 2 setbacks in life with their health, not necessarily very serious ones, sometimes very serious ones. And I think we've always battled to make Vitality relevant to them. We've always known it would be, but we've battled to make it relevant, because for some of those people, the next best action may not be to go for a run tomorrow. It may simply be to go for a walk, or it may be to go and get a glucose test, or it may be to go and get a scan that would pick up cancer, or it may be, whatever it is. And some of those are around non-communicable diseases, lifestyle diseases. Sometimes they're around life stage events, not that it's a disease at all, but, the joy of being pregnant, you don't want to then have Discovery tell you, we'll go for a run tomorrow if you're 7 months pregnant. So what AI, together with that Vitality program, has allowed us to do is to launch personalised Vitality. And that's what Personal Health Pathways is. It's a series of AI models on the data we've been collecting since 2000, and which you still have to give us permission to use on your behalf, and you don't have to give that permission. If you don't, we won't use it. But that has allowed us to launch a personalized approach to Vitality, which, although it's early days, has really surpassed our expectations over the first year that we've had it in South Africa, and we now, as you point out, are launching it in the UK. We've also started to launch it to some of our partners. So one of the things I think few South Africans realize about Discovery is that although we only have the 2 primary markets, South Africa and the UK, we've also exported the Vitality program through partnerships with life insurers and more recently some very specific types of partnerships in the health insurance space. And we have more than 40 partners around the world in, most major markets around the world. So we're also taking personal health pathways to those partners. And that's, very, very exciting from a technologist's perspective because it's enabled us to move a lot of our capabilities into replicable cloud computing stacks that we can stand up very rapidly for new partners. We can run on their behalf in cloud data centers, but within their data sovereignty parameters. And it really has made, I guess, Vitality a truly global export, as you mentioned at the outset.
So again, AI is very much from as a consumer. I see it as a consumer-facing proposition from Discovery. But I presume you're using this technology behind the scenes as well in your enterprise software development side of things, in managing your IT estate. Maybe take us through a little bit of how you're using it there. I mean, how has it changed the way you develop software at Discovery, for example?
Well, a lot of Discovery is a software development organization. I mean, it always surprises people when I say to them that in some of our business areas and some of our biggest business areas like health and life, we don't buy any traditional enterprise software. We develop everything from scratch. And as a consequence, we've got very capable development teams. And those development teams have obviously been, early adopters of AI. And I'd say that's gone through, several phases. I mean, the one that I think was, quite easy and quick to adopt was, simple advanced code completion capabilities. So, you're still basically writing the code, but, think about it as a sort of an intelligent assistant that just knows what your next line is going to look like and completes the code for you. And I think that was relatively painless to implement. We then, started to move into the world of, more sophisticated coding assistants. And I think that world is one that we are using, but I think we've still got a few lessons to learn about how we best apply that. And one of the things that I think has come out certainly for us there is that whilst if you're a startup today, you'd be, incredibly, I don't know, you'd have to have your head in the sand not to use AI to write your code almost entirely from scratch. In large enterprises where you are writing code which integrates with a number of different legacy systems, where you've got multiple teams developing that code, where you've got the need for things like explainability and code maintenance, I think we still are slightly conservative in how we use AI coding assistants. I mean, having said that, we do have senior developers now using all the major agentic coding frameworks. We just put a lot of effort into putting guardrails around that and into limiting, which is a strange thing to say, but into limiting what those agentic coding tools can do. To make sure that they're really still writing code to our standards, to our security requirements, our privacy requirements, code that works properly with everything we've already got. And it's actually a very interesting space in the technical world today, and one that I think if you read some of the hype out there, you wouldn't necessarily see as important, but I think from discussing it with other CIOs, many of them in certainly larger regulated enterprises are seeing exactly the same pattern.
How is it affecting the type of talent that you're looking for on the IT side? Are you hiring differently now than you were a few years ago? Are you looking for different skill sets?
Not really. I mean, we've always had a belief that we would hire, young talent and really invest in them and try and keep them at Discovery. And we've actually just a week week and a half ago completed our annual grad hack, where we invite teams from many of the major universities and some of the coding academies, and we get them to compete over a weekend. And of course, they do amazing things. If I compare it to what they did 8 or 10 years ago, now they can deliver a complete product in a weekend because they're using AI. So they're coming in, and they're typically fourth-year students. And they're coming in teams, and they're taking a task we assign to them, and they're solving it. And then it's quite prestigious to be amongst the winning teams. And we normally offer the top 40 or so people on the program jobs at Discovery. So a lot of our young talent is coming in through that grad hack program. In certain specific areas, we've also had some internships, which we can discuss if you'd like. But I think that South African universities are doing, a wonderful job actually bringing young people going through computer science and business information systems and engineering type degrees and data science degrees now as well into this world of AI. So they come in very happy to, use AI. They're very successful. And then what we do is that we put a lot of money into training people. I have to say I was actually a bit of a skeptic about this 4 or 5 years ago, because we decided that what we would do is to make some of the well-known online academies just freely available to people in Discovery. And I'd expected that we'd get 3-4% of people sort of taking this up and doing, what are quite hard programs to do, but in your spare time. But what we've actually seen is that, we've had 50-60% of the people in IT now completing at least one program with an AWS or a Google through online academies. And we've really seen that people are willing to invest in themselves. And we're finding that a lot more successful. I mean, to be perfectly honest, I think it's quite hard to go and hire somebody today who's a absolute specialist in agentic security or in, advanced AI models. But it's if you've got the right culture and the right career options, you can bring in graduates who can learn that very, very quickly, and they then tend to stay with us. We've been very fortunate to have very long-lived IT staff compared to many other organizations. So I think it's those two things. Bring in young people, give them access to training, and keep them. I think that's the formula for Discovery.
Yeah, I guess in the old days, you could specialize in. I suppose you can to some extent, but in the old days, you became a COBOL programmer, and that's what you did for life. These days, I think you have to be a lot more adaptable and willing to change and learn, because the industry is just moving at such a speed these days.
I did say to the latest round of graduates, and I do actually believe this, that I do think we've gone through maybe about a decade where, if you could code, you were in demand and you could walk into a job. And I do think that we've come to the end of that era. I think now, yes, you do need to be able to code, but you need to also understand a lot of the discipline that a university education or its equivalent would give you around how computer architectures work, and how to think about algorithms and how to work in teams and how design-based approaches work, and how you deal with risk and governance and all these good things. And I think that if you come with those generic skills, as well as a personality that can actually work in teams and can communicate effectively, what then becomes the most important thing is just to keep learning. And I think that we are seeing that. A couple of years ago, I think there was some debate. Do you still need graduates? Just hire people who've done a brief programming course. And I mean, that's not, by the way, to knock some of the programming academies that I think are practically delivering graduates. But I'm talking about people who've done a few weeks programming course, and now they're suddenly a developer. I think that it's going to be harder to build a career on that than it was over the last decade going forward.
I saw an interesting a post by Elon Musk the other day. I think it was yesterday, in fact, as of this recording. He said that source code is going away. And I know he likes to tweet controversial stuff, but he said that like no one looks at assembly language anymore, in the future, no one's going to look at source code. You're going to go from prompt to binary, and source code. Source code is going to become irrelevant. What do you make of a comment like that? And do you think that the whole discipline, the whole profession of writing code is going to go away?
I mean, I wouldn't put myself in the league of prescience of a Dario Amodei or an Elon Musk, but I do find they make these, massive statements, which I guess galvanize action. What I do think is it's going to take considerably longer to come to fruition than you may think if you simply look at their statements. And I prefer to believe, although you can always phone me in 10 years' time and tell me I was wrong, that whilst you may not be writing a lot of code, it's still important to understand how some of the fundamental underlying theoretical constructs within coding work. And I think there will be new theoretical constructs that will come about that will enable us to have explainable AI-generated code. I think that's going to become a big issue. Efficient AI-generated code. And AI-generated code that you can actually maintain effectively. And all three of those are not necessarily a given today. I think anyone who's done any significant project with AI-generated code knows that a year later, with model drift and model changes, you end up with something that even an AI is not quite sure what the previous AI did, although they can always interpret it and rewrite it for you. And I think that becomes quite dangerous because code is not just a series of instructions that, execute something. It also, in many ways, is the systemization of all the processes in a business. And I think you still need some degree of human oversight, certainly for the foreseeable future. And when I talk about the foreseeable future, 3 to 10 years, I think we're still going to need a degree of human oversight and expertise. At the moment, to give you a feel, I would say that we're getting about, 20-odd percent, 25% in some areas efficiency gain using AI coding. But I mean, that still means that our developers are doing 70 to 80% of the coding as they always did. In a large corporate, coders were probably only getting to 25 to 30% of their time spent coding anyway, by the way. I mean, that was probably the state of the art. The rest of the time was spent, in meetings and doing code reviews and tests and, meeting with business users. And, all of that can be assisted by AI. AI is very good at mock-ups and, if you want to quickly do a design and, have a quick test case or something, AI is brilliant at doing that. But it's still not quite as easy as people think, taking that to a production grade working system that you intend to keep in place over a long duration of time.
I wanted to ask you about, I mean, clearly Discovery is a business that likes to move quickly on technology and innovation. I think Mark Zuckerberg famously had a motto for Meta, which was move fast and break things. Discovery likes to move fast, as I said, but it is also a heavily regulated business as a financial services provider. How do you manage that dichotomy?
It's probably you're putting your finger on one of the biggest parts of my job there, Duncan, which is just balancing those two things. I mean, first of all, we can't break things, right? We have a responsibility to our members and our partners to treat their data and everything about them with the utmost care. And we're dealing with incredibly sensitive healthcare data, financial data, investment data. So we really do feel, I think, a strong sense of responsibility to look at that. And And as a consequence, what we've kept as a sort of a mandatory, centrally driven capability is our information security team and our privacy team. And they set, very strong and detailed policies and guidelines. We also work very closely with our compliance and ethics teams. And those are, as I say, they're mandatory. So whilst we push the execution to the edges in the business, we really set a policy and governance framework that maintains central control over that. And we have a risk and audit function centrally that will go and check that is actually being implemented. So I think we have a good balance between a mandatory central control and governance and oversight function and the execution at the edges. And of course, a lot of that then has to be embedded in the culture, because if you try to impose that kind of structure in a culture that wasn't welcoming of that, I think you'd end up in a lot of trouble. But I think we have the benefit that over many years we've created a culture where I think people are accepting of that approach and are really desirous to comply with that. It's interesting, just to give you a little anecdote. We had our chief privacy officer develop sort of a set of standards and guidelines for AI that have to be implemented by a data scientist if they're developing a new model or process or whatever. And we have many of those, several hundred of those under development at any given point in time. And of course, we've got many data scientists, because a lot of the actuaries have had a sort of a natural path into data science, and Discovery's got several hundred actuaries who work for us. And then we've also hired a whole lot of data scientists over and above that. So we've got a lot of people working on these data-driven modeling type projects. And they had a look at this and they said, no, we really think this is too onerous, and we think we can simplify it. So they took it and they developed their own set of guidelines. And I was expecting something that would be, very high level and, 1 or 2 pages that I wouldn't like. And I tell them, no, you can't do that. And of course, they've come up with an incredibly detailed way to self-police. It's just written in a language that makes sense to them. And it's been very interesting just to see the evolution of that, and I think that comes from having a culture of care, I suppose, about member data. Anyway, I mean, it is something that we always grapple with. I do think that sometimes there are frustrations on the business side that we're kind of holding back the latest AI they saw over the weekend, or that they're using at home, or that in some cases now they've seen their kids using. And then they'll come and tell me, oh, but if only you'd let me use X, Y, Z. But I mean, they actually, they complain, but then they're very accepting of the argument that, okay, but hang on, this is not the same. This is a large enterprise. We need to do this with caution. Let's progress slowly. And also, I think there's a growing realization that the winning strategy, as much as you can do cool things with the latest AI, is not so much going to be around having the very latest or smartest large language model. It's going to be about creating what I think is increasingly called the harness, although there are other terms for it, that enable that to be used at scale and, in a way that's safe. And, I think the companies that invest now in building that out will be the AI winners of the future. And I think there's a growing acceptance of that amongst the business.
Interesting. I want to come back to something you said earlier. You mentioned that Discovery has quite a federated model when it comes to technology, and that I think you've mentioned 7 CIOs across the various businesses. Does that make you a bit like a conductor of an orchestra, Derek? Do you are you in the middle, sort of trying to get everyone to play the same tune?
Well, I think a conductor would get everyone to play the same tune. I suppose here what we're dealing with is, the strings and the woodwinds and the drums and so on might play different tunes at different times, but every now and again we want them all to play together. So it is an interesting job, and that is one aspect of the job. I chair something called our CIO Forum. That's where we get all our CIOs. I mean, 7 is just in the insurance business in South Africa. Then we have several global CIOs as well who in other countries. So, I mean, it depends on exactly how you add it up, but I think we have around about 14 CIOs at the moment in Discovery. We collaborate. They don't report to me. They actually report into the businesses in which they are based. But there's I think, a strong acceptance that we need to talk to each other. We need to be cognizant of what those mandatory functions are that I spoke about. And we ultimately all work for Discovery and need to do what's right for Discovery and its members. And I think that facilitates an environment where we can federate but still have sufficient central control to keep everyone working together where that's necessary.
I know we are about to run out of time, Derek, but I want to squeeze in 2 last questions. I read that Adrian Gore has talked about AI helping to double Discovery's operating income by 2029. I know you're in a closed period, so I can't talk numbers, but what does that ambition, I mean, how does that land on your desk? What does it mean for you as Group CIO that he's made that, I don't know if it's a commitment, but that's certainly an ambition.
I wasn't even aware that he'd made that commitment in exactly those words, Duncan, but I'll take your word for it.
I may be misquoting him. Apologies if I am.
I'll take your word for it. I think what is wonderful about Discovery is that, we would always see that as predominantly coming from growth and having new products and new capabilities that we take to the market directly as well as through our partners. So whereas I think many companies see AI predominantly as a way of cutting costs, for Discovery, it's predominantly about growing. And then the operations aspect is to scale behind that growth in a very intelligent way. So one of the things I'm very proud of at Discovery is that, through various rounds of COVID and now AI and so on, we have been a company that I think is very loyal to our employees and, would much rather retrain and reskill them if that's necessary. And certainly with AI, I think that is very necessary in a number of areas, than actually start to cut costs. So, we do see people being redeployed. We do see the opportunity for operational efficiencies, but we're also doing that in a company where I think we're fortunate because of the vision of Adrian and his team that we can do that on the back of a business that's growing very rapidly. And as a consequence, the primary vector for that would be growth, not cost cutting.
Lastly, Derek, I ask all of my guests on Meet the CIO, and I'm going to put you a little bit on the spot here, but I ask all of my guests on Meet the CIO to share 1 or 2 of their top hacks for productivity. I think a lot of people say that they're making use of AI tools increasingly, but what's top of your list when it comes to getting things done more quickly and supercharging your productivity?
I think probably the single most important thing that I've learned over the course of my career, and of course you have to have the privilege that I have to be in quite a senior position in a company with very good people, is don't wait to get others involved in things that you need to get done. Get them involved immediately. And if you do that, people actually often want to help you. They want to get involved, and people will amaze you with the quality of the work and the output that they do. I think the mistake, certainly that I think I sometimes made much earlier in my career, was to sort of hang on till something until I realized I didn't have the time to do it and then try to get other people involved, which of course is grossly unfair. So that's got nothing to do with AI. I do use AI quite extensively. I have in all humility realized that AI is much better at writing than I am. Duncan, that certainly wouldn't apply to you. But I always thought I was reasonably literate until I realized that AI could rewrite. But I still don't do that in an incredibly productive way, because what I tend to do is to write it myself and then ask AI to rewrite it so that I get a much better and more polished result. But I am starting to work on AI as a thought partner as well, and as a research partner for me. As you can imagine, there are a lot of things that I try and just keep a very thin. I keep a thin knowledge of a lot of topics, and I find AI incredibly useful as a sort of research assistant for that. But yeah, the biggest single thing about time management, I think, goes back to Stephen Covey's first things first. I think, first of all, only have a handful of priorities and be very clear on what they are, and spend the vast majority of your time doing them and prioritize them. And secondly, involve other people in helping you get those priorities done early, and people will amaze you with what they'll do.
Derek, it's been a great pleasure catching up with you again after so many years. Derek Wilcocks is Group CIO at Discovery. Really appreciate your time chatting to TechCentral's Meet the CIO today, and let's do the next one in a much shorter space of time.
It would be wonderful, Duncan. Thank you for having me.